Greetings, hello, and a very, very warm welcome and a big Eid Mubarak to everybody who has logged in today. After a good break, people would have come back to their workplaces, and we start today's session with this webinar. So we welcome all of you to this bilingual webinar session that is being delivered here on YouTube, as well as my senior colleague and our CEO, Sandy Dweck, is delivering the webinar live. Everyone who is listening to today's session in English is welcome to join the session back using the Zoom link that you may have, or you could look it up again on our webinar page. And for any question and answer sessions, you can join the meeting back and ask any queries or questions. Before we begin this session, I would like to read out a disclaimer that we are not code consultants, and the Saudi Building Code is the owner of Saudi Building Code is SBC as an entity. Our aim is not to do any education related to the code or the implementation, but the aim of this session is to bring about a understanding of the aspects of fire safety, as well as passive fire protection and matters related to compliance of passive fire protection. In this session, we will be using some of the terminology which is in Arabic from the official Arabic Constructionary, the document that has been released and published by International Code Council as specific technical terms can be read in Arabic in many ways. So the Arabic Constructionary aims to bridge that gap and bring about a harmony. For those of you who may not know us, Thomas Bell-Wright International Consultants has been around in this region for 26 years. We started off as a curtain wall testing laboratory where mock-ups of curtain wall systems were erected in our facility by subcontractors, and they were tested for air, water, and weather tightness. Over a decade ago, we started doing fire testing as a first in this region, starting off with a furnace, which is a 3x3 furnace, and a reaction to fire equipment called the Steiner tunnel for the American ASTM E84 test method. And over the last 7 to 8 years, we have expanded heavily in many directions on matters related to passive fire protection, which includes adding 3 more furnaces for fire resistance tests, large 4 meters by 5 meters furnaces, a horizontal and a vertical both load bearing. And we've added a large number of fire propagation tests, the large scale fire propagation test for cladding, as well as reaction to fire tests as per many European and American standards. So we continue our journey about increasing awareness related to the Saudi building codes, as well as the material compliance. If you are one of those few who had joined us in the previous sessions, we started the first episode talking about the general structure of the code, as well as concepts of compliance, which are currently available in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We later talked about a very critical aspect, a basic aspect of any code, as well as the Saudi building codes, which is the occupancy concept, or how different types of occupancies or types of construction are grouped together. And we also gave an introduction of fire safety concepts or fire safety mechanisms, that is the active fire protection and passive fire protection and what these two fire protection concepts entail. Today, we further on this concept and we talk about the 7th chapter of the Saudi Building Codes 201 and 801, the chapter on fire and smoke control mechanisms. And later in this, as we continue the series, we will also be talking about reaction to fire as well as propagation to fire. A important and a critical aspect and for ensuring fire safety in any and every building. And we today will start with a small recap. In the first episode, we saw various codes. We also understood that in the kingdom, while the codes exists, the conformity mechanism exists as certification programs run by the Saudi Arabian Standards Authority, as well as the code allows for various conformity programs to be run by third-party certification and listing agencies. And we will talk more about the same through the course of this session. A very important slide, a very basic slide, which talks about how different occupancy types are grouped. And if you want to listen to more, you can head back to the recordings of the previous sessions. We talked about fire protection and how active and passive fire protection have been used now for decades and decades across many jurisdictions to ensure that buildings, they do not really convert into fire accidents on the basis of small accidents. So in today's session, we further and we look at the chapter 7. Fire and smoke containment is the core subject of this chapter. How we ensure by designing, procuring, constructing, as well as installation and maintenance of several different components, materials, and systems that build up the compartment. We talk about the chapter 7. There are over 22 different sections in this chapter, starting with the definitions and covering many aspects like what and how different components like exterior walls, firewalls, fire barriers, what is a smoke barrier, how smoke partitions are created, horizontal assemblies, vertical openings, what is a shaft, how a shaft enclosure is defined, and it goes up to several different mechanisms and aspects which help designers, architects, material suppliers, contractors, consultants, as well as facility management companies to make sure that the fire safety mechanisms are designed and implemented and maintained correctly. We, in today's session, will focus on 2 sections of the chapter 7. These 2 sections are aimed to give the listeners an introduction and a better understanding of passive fire protection's implementation and give you a general idea as how the code would bring about this construct. We would like to run you through several definitions. I will not read out all of them. These can be read at length in Arabic and English, and I would welcome you all to pick up the copy of the code and read through all of these. Some concepts, for example, control area. What is a control area? These are spaces within the building where quantities of hazardous materials not exceeding the minimum allowable quantities per control area are stored, dispensed, or handled. Such definitions need to be understood properly in order to read, understand, and implement the code. What is a shaft? An enclosed space extending through one or more stories of a building, connecting vertical openings in successive floors or floors and roof. As I said, some of these are good to read, but all of these are important to understand and implement. We all talk about fire doors, but what is a fire door and what is a fire door assembly? Well, an assembly is a combination of a fire door, a frame, hardware, and other accessories that together provide specific degree of fire protection to the opening. What is a firewall? A fire resistance rated wall having protected openings which restricts the spread of fire and extends continuously from the foundation to or through the roof with sufficient structural stability under the conditions to allow collapse of construction on either side without the collapse of the wall. We move further and we talk more on matters related to smoke control. What is a fire damper? A listed device, a tested and a certified listed device installed in ducts and air transfer openings designed to close automatically upon the detection of heat and resist the passage of flame. Fire dampers are classified for use in either static systems that will automatically shut down in the event of fire, or in dynamic systems that continue to operate during a fire. A dynamic fire damper is tested and rated for closure under elevated temperature airflow. And there are several different types of dampers. There is also a smoke barrier, which is a continuous membrane, either vertical or horizontal, and such a wall, floor, or a ceiling assembly that is designed and constructed to restrict the movement of smoke. Such is the detail of a better understanding once you read through the definitions. We again move to a very interesting and important aspect related to compartmentalization. Once we have the fire doors, shafts, fire resistive barriers all put in place, we need the utilities. And the MEP, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing contractors would need to come in, make sure we all get the utilities and access to utilities. But in this process, all the fire rating is broken off just for the utilities to come in. But then a very well organized and a known system which ensures that the fire resistance rating is brought back to the original plan needs to be implemented properly. And to implement this properly, you first need to know the terminology. What is a fire resistant joint system? An assemblage of specific materials or products that are designed, tested, and fire resistance rated in accordance to either ASTM E1966 or UL 2079 to resist for a prescribed period of time the passage of fire through joints made in or between fire resistant rated assemblies. There are several types of these systems. For example, you can see what a through penetration or a member penetration is. And similarly, there are terminologies which are best understood once you read through the definitions. A joint, as an example, the opening in or between adjacent assemblies that is created due to the building tolerances or is designed to allow independent movement of the building in any plane caused by thermal, seismic, wind, or any other loading. We continue on terminologies which are related to the fire stopping. For example, we have the L rating, the T rating, or the F rating. L rating talks about the air leakage when a fire stop system or a fire resistant joint system is tested in accordance to UL 1479 or UL 2079. The T rating, again, is the time period that the penetration fire stop, including the penetrating item, limits the maximum temperature rise to 165 degrees above its initial temperature through the penetration on the non-fire side when tested in accordance to ASTM E814 or UL 1479. We continue, and there is so much, and as I mentioned, I am not going to try and read through each and every definition, but I encourage you to read and understand how different components are defined for a better understanding. Small terms, which are so important to know. We all know and use the word fire resistance. That is the property of materials or their assemblies that prevents or retards the passage of excessive heat, hot gases, or flames under the conditions of use. But there is another term, which is fire blocking. Building materials or materials approved for use as fire blocking installed to resist free passage of flame to other areas of the building through concealed spaces. A fire barrier is a fire resistance rated wall assembly of materials designed to restrict the spread of fire in which continuity is maintained. So not only are these terms very important to know, I'm going to leave this screen as part of the recording for people who may want to just have a quick read and understand what these terms are. As you understand these terms, it is important to know that in conjunction with a better understanding of different types of assembly, you also need to know the construction classification type. And the Saudi Building Code defines these on the lines of ICC, IBC codes, the type 1 and 2, type 3, type 4, and type 5 as different types of construction based on the materials or the classification of materials used to construct these buildings. Why do you need to know this? Well, armed with a good understanding of the terms and a proper understanding of the occupancy type and the construction classification type, a reader or a user of the code will then be able to understand and define that what is in the number of hours or minutes the fire resistance rating that needs to be designed for different types of occupancies. This is the key used to define how fire resistance is designed in, built, as well as maintained. In the same understanding, you can read through the code when we talk about these fire resistance rating for exterior walls based on fire separation distance. I did not read through all of these, but in the definition pages, you would have read and understood where fire separation distance is and how it is maintained. With the completion of definitions, we will move to the second section, which is fire resistance ratings and fire tests. This section goes on to great detail in explaining fire resistance ratings, how they are figured out, how they are tested, which type of system needs to be tested in which configuration, etc. But two are a very important sections which we will focus on today, that what are the methods for determining the fire resistance. People familiar with the usage of building materials would know that fire resistance designs need to be certified by an approved agency, somebody like Thomas Bell-Wright International Consultants, who can help you comply with products which are certified and listed to the standards in the Saudi Building Code. There is also a very important section which defines marking and identification of how the fire resistance rating needs to be marked and identified on the components and systems in the construction area. What are the standards? Well, there is a long, not a very long, but almost a long list of ASTM and NFPA and many UL standards, which are defined for different components, which are defined in great detail in this chapter. We would briefly talk about these test methods. What are these test methods, and what is this fire resistance, which we briefed about in the previous session? A fire resistance test is a test which is conducted in the laboratory like ours, where the test laboratory tries to recreate a scenario of a fully developed fire in a building. If you look at the image on the top right, you would notice and see that there is a section of the building which is photographed where there is fire and smoke which is visible. But the section adjacent to, on its left, or the story above, or the story below, seems to be completely unaffected by the fire and smoke. How is this possible? This is possible exactly on the basis of the fire containment strategy, what we call fire resistance. And this scenario is replicated inside a furnace. Inside a furnace where a horizontal or a vertical partition or a door is installed, recreates a time temperature curve, what you see as a graph on the screen, where as the arrow moves, you would notice that the temperature inside the furnace is increasing, which typically goes up to 900 or 1100 degrees Celsius within a span of 40 to 50 minutes. What this does is it creates fire, high temperature, hot gases, just like it would be created or be happening in case of a big fire accident or a tragedy, where the compartment needs to demonstrate itself and make sure that it is able to contain the fire. This is tested and validated through various fire tests. Almost all the American fire resistance tests, whether it's the ASTM, NFPA, UL, follow a very similar time temperature curve, as well as almost all of them would call for a hose stream test. The image, which is in the center right, 3 images, where the fire side is blasted with a water hose. Now, though many of you would be familiar with these fire resistance tests and would probably now better understand that when a real scenario is replicated inside the laboratory, it is easy to validate how the sample, which has been installed in the lab, behaved. Now, this is good to understand, but it is extremely important to know that a test will never or not always be a 100% surety of what is being supplied to the construction site. And this is where certification and listing as a concept is adopted as a route to conformity by the Saudi Building Code, where it starts with someone conducting a sampling at the manufacturer's site. And once the sampling has been done, the sample is picked up and installed in the laboratory, and the tests are conducted. Once the tests are successful, a series of activities start, and these series of activities ensure that the factory gets audited regularly to ensure that they are following all the quality control systems and mechanisms to ensure that the same product which was produced at the time of the test is continued to be manufactured. This becomes very, very important and critical, because not only someone needs to verify what product reaches on the construction site, there are several details which come out from the listing document or the certification and listing directory, which are required for the inspection agency, an approved third-party inspection agency, which is a requirement of the building code to be able to inspect that the installation is done exactly as the way the products are installed. The Saudi Building Code points to NFPA 80, the method which is for installation and maintenance of fire doors, as an example among many other test standards or inspection standards which define how inspections need to be done. So it is not only important to understand how these things are being done, but also understand that how certification directories operate. Any product that is required by the code calls for a listed product. And what a listed product means is that there is a third-party certification body which has listed the product for conformity to not only the standards, but also pointing to specific details of what, let's say, the fire resistance rating is, as well as going to several other aspects and details of the product in terms of dimensions, sizes, and the drawings of the systems which are used to identify the system at the construction site, as well as, of course, the address of the factory to know and understand where is the product coming from. Once all these details, which are listed on a public directory, are available, the stakeholders, the inspection agency, the fire consultant, the authority having jurisdiction have enough and required information to make sure that these can be inspected correctly at the construction site. This brings me towards an end of today's session. As explained in the beginning as well, all the attendees who would like to ask certain questions or answers can head back to the webinar link. You can join back the meeting now, and you can write in your questions directly, or if needed, and if you are listening to this as a recorded webinar, you are most welcome to send in your questions or queries to us directly in an email. You can write to us at meetings@bell-wright.com. We look forward to answering your questions and queries. Thank you for today.